And then, of course, there's no one on the Democratic side who's talking like Laura Loomer. There just isn't. Find me one person. Imagine, Piers, I said this on Twitter, imagine if an advisor to Joe Biden, a close friend and ally of Biden, when Biden was president, after a synagogue was attacked, had said the synagogue was evil and that all Jews should be removed from the US. It would have been the end of the Biden presidency. You would have been on a roll loop for 7 days straight. We know this.
Nobody answered that. Nobody could. That was Mehdi Hasan on Piers Morgan. And that hypothetical is not the strongest thing he said in this interview. Stay with me, because it gets sharper from here.
And there's no denying the fact that since Donald Trump came on the scene in 2015, we now have an atmosphere in this country that is more hate-filled, with more hate crimes, more political violence.
But there's also, but Mehdi, on that,
more violent, more divisive atmosphere.
Right, but in 2025, there was more violence from the far left than there was from the right for the first time in a long time. And I found it incredibly disturbing.
The crucial statement is...
Well, I found, look, we'll come to the right part of this, but on the left, what I found increasingly disturbing to watch is the kind of callous inhumanity that a lot on the left show themselves to have when you look at, like, the murder of Charlie Kirk, for example, or the healthcare executive. You know, I saw the front page of the New York Post yesterday with these three appalling women, young women, whose brains were so warped. So they just want to be celebrating the cold-blooded murder of a father and husband in the streets of New York. What is going on there?
So let me just say two things about that. One is, I'm glad you said for the first time in many years.
Yeah.
Because the reality is that for decades, and even now, right-wing violence is a huge problem in the United States, and people are in denial about this. Many of your guests have come on and just lied about the fact that political violence is not a right-wing problem. Sebastian Gorka, who runs the counterterrorism strategy for this government, just put out an anti-terrorism strategy, Piers, from the Trump administration, which did not mention the far right. It mentioned the left, it mentioned Muslims, it mentioned communists. Antifa doesn't mention the right, which is insane when the majority of violence in this country in the recent years has come from the right. So that's one point. Number two, in terms of the reactions, I know you're not going to like me saying this, but I think the evidence is with me, is that the people you cite, the people who do celebrate murder or say dumb shit or act callously, are a fringe, Piers. When Charlie Kirk was killed, everyone I saw, mainstream leftists, was not celebrating it. And every single Democrat, from Kamala Harris to Joe Biden to every Chuck Schumer, was condemning it, right? And when any kind of political violence happens, mainstream people on the centre-left, whether it's in the Labour Party in the UK or the Democratic Party in the US, Can I finish my point?
I'm just challenging that one. I would challenge one thing on that. There were university professors, there were doctors, nurses, teachers. There were people in real positions of authority and responsibility that were quite happy to post videos of themselves celebrating Charlie Kirk's murder.
I'm going to dispute that, Piers. No, I'm going to dispute that. If you really want to get into it, I was there following a lot of this. A lot of the people who were doxxed were not celebrating. They were pointing out that he said horrible things, which is totally a legitimate thing to say. They were not celebrating his death. That was a right-wing propaganda line. But we don't have time to get into each individual case. Can I make my broader point, which is when a mosque is attacked in the US, Republican politicians are either silent. I pointed this out, that Ted Cruz did not condemn it until I called him out on it. Multiple Republicans have still not condemned. Elise Stefanik has not condemned it. She's busy condemning some Democratic candidate in Texas who said something awful. They have not condemned a terrorist attack in the United States. That's one point. You can't find Democrats who do the same when there's a synagogue attack or anything equivalent.
Hit like right now if you want more people to see this. 1 second. That is all it takes.
And then, of course, there's no one on the Democratic side who's talking like Laura Loomer. There just isn't. Find me one person. Imagine, Piers, I said this on Twitter, imagine if an advisor to Joe Biden, a close friend and ally of Biden, when Biden was president, after a synagogue was attacked, had said the synagogue was evil and that all Jews should be removed from the US. It would have been the end of the Biden presidency. You would have been on a roll loop for 7 days straight. We know this. And yet Republicans get away with this stuff. You mentioned Andy Ogles. It's not just Andy Ogles. It's Representative Brandon Gill, who said Islamic immigration is killing us. Chip Roy, Representative Chip Roy of Texas, who said no more Muslims, he said in March in a tweet. You have, of course, Randy Fine, who you've had on this show, who said mainstream Islam, not Islamism, not jihadism, mainstream Islam is an evil death cult, he said. If you're telling me that doesn't contribute to an atmosphere where people might want to pick up weapons and attack Muslims and mosques, I don't know what to say to you.
Well, yeah, I mean, I had this debate with Jonathan Conricus yesterday, the former IDF spokesman, because
I saw it.
At the Tommy Robinson march, there were speakers brazenly talking about removing Islam from all aspects of politics and authority in the UK. They weren't saying Islamists or extremists or anything. They were just and of course, Islam is followed by Muslims. They were basically just saying, get the Muslims out. And Jonathan was trying to defend this and happy to say he attended the march and, wasn't fazed by what he heard. And I was like, but imagine if it had been about Jews there. Imagine if they said we're going to get all the Jews out of Parliament, all the Jews out of local level politics in the UK. All hell would have broken loose. Now, conversely,
by the way, can I just add to that, Piers? I'm glad you pushed Jonathan Conricus on that. And you know what he said to you in response? He said, it wasn't about Muslims, it was about Islam, which is this kind of very lazy distinction.
Islamism,
because it's interesting that in the shooters... Well, no, he tried to disrupt from the fact that the speaker who you referenced said Islam and not Muslims, as if that's some kind of get out. I would point to the Shooters Manifesto in San Diego, where the shooter specifically says, Piers, in the manifesto, I don't hate Muslims, I hate Islam. It's the same get out that even mass murderers are using.
A mass shooter wrote in his own manifesto, I do not hate Muslims, I hate Islam. The exact same words, the exact same distinction that politicians and commentators use on television every single day. When a mass murderer is using your talking points word for word in the document he wrote before killing people, that is not a coincidence. That is a direct line between rhetoric and reality. And that line has been sitting in plain sight the entire time. Now here is the part that should make everyone uncomfortable regardless of where you stand politically.
I'm not happy that Donald Trump pardoned a guy who wore a Camp Auschwitz t-shirt to January the 6th, and now that guy might be able to get millions of dollars of tax money from a slush fund that Donald Trump just created. So I'm against pardoning anti-Semitic rioters. I'm against being soft on anti-Semitic criminals. I don't think two things are inconsistent, though, Piers, which is to say, number one, there's a lot of anti-Semitic hate crimes out there, right? I've written about them. There were two horrific synagogue attacks under Donald Trump's first presidency, if you remember, by far-right activists, not by far-left activists. But at the same time, we should also acknowledge, gladly, that at least we take anti-Semitism seriously as a society, as a media, as a country. No one would say that the governments of the countries are not taking it seriously. Donald Trump has set up multiple anti-Semitism investigations, task forces. Republicans in Congress have held, I think, a dozen hearings on anti-Semitism. Do you know how many they've held on Islamophobia? None. Not a single specific hearing on Islamophobia.
12 hearings on anti-Semitism, 0 on Islamophobia, after a terrorist attack on a mosque on American soil. That is not about who suffers more. Nobody is playing victim Olympics here. Mehdi himself said that anti-Semitism is real. The data shows it. 2 synagogue attacks happened under the last administration by far-right extremists, and they were condemned by everyone. But when a mosque gets attacked and elected officials stay silent, when the counterterrorism strategy does not mention the group committing the majority of the violence, when a mass shooter uses the exact same language as sitting members of Congress in his manifesto, at some point the pattern stops being a coincidence. Both communities deserve protection. Both communities deserve to be taken seriously. The question that stays with me, when the response to identical attacks on different communities is this different, what does that tell you about whose safety we have actually decided to prioritize? Drop your answer in the comments. Hit like if this breakdown gave you something the headlines did not. Subscribe to Veridical. See you in the next one.